and basically you don't have some place like Charter saying you can't go to Facebook, let's say, or Netflix, or they're charging more for Netflix.
Well, right. It would be where AT&T would allow you to go to Facebook, but not allow you to go to a Comcast site.
Right. So the basic ideas behind net neutrality are actually a good thing. They want to make sure there isn't censorship of the internet. I think we all kind of agree on that, but there's a lot of different approaches to how to do it. And what's interesting is kind of the backlash of legislation. When we talk about proposing all this sort of legislation, we don't think there's ramifications. This week, there's an interesting story in India. Now, mind you, it's not the United States, but Facebook rolled out something called Free Basics to India last year. And it is a free internet service aimed kind of at the low-income housing market in India. Because in India, there's actually 850 million people not online. And they have a comparable population to China, and China has 3 times as many people online as India. So Facebook saw this as not only, I mean, it's not an altruistic thing. They saw a way, hey, more people can get online, more people can use Facebook, we can advertise.
You mentioned last week Google's kind of doing the same thing.
Same basic idea.
Trying to create
online.
more customers.
But here's where this gets kind of interesting with net neutrality. So Facebook, because these areas don't have a lot of data, like wireless data in the area, they restricted the sites that people could visit to some that aren't very data heavy. Things like the BBC, the Wall Street Journal, Wikipedia, Facebook, obviously, and a couple other sites like that they got to pick. Now, mind you, you could submit as a site owner your site to be part of that. But India's government has actually stricken down this program and completely banned it from the country now, taking off the million-plus people that were using this free internet service because it essentially violates net neutrality in their mind, because they're picking which sites you can access and which sites you can't. They are banning the entire free service, even though it was completely free and aimed to help low-income.
So that's how big this argument is over net neutrality.
Yes.
Now, what are your thoughts on net neutrality? I don't want you to get in trouble with the Geek Squad.
No. You know, I think I differ from a lot of my fellow geeks.
Right.
You know, I think a lot of geeks are just all in on net neutrality, especially in passing additional legislation here in the United States to make sure that happens. And I could get into this for a very long period of time, but my general thinking is that what has caused this problem, especially in the United States, is legislation, and I don't think passing additional legislation is going to solve that. And what I mean by that is, back in the 60s and 50s, the United States basically said to these cable companies, hey, if you run these lines, these telecom lines out throughout the United States, we'll essentially give you a monopoly in the area so that you can recoup your costs for investing that time and money. But what they didn't do is they didn't put in a end time. They didn't say for so long. So now we've had this going for 30, 40, 50 years where they've had a monopoly. And so what happens is, how many internet options do you have at your home? Maybe 2. You probably have a DSL option and 1 cable provider.
Right.
So there is no competition. So what happens is, then you have to worry what if Charter's going to block ESPN? What if they're going to block something else? When in other countries like South Korea, where they have 50 different options, it isn't talked about as much, because if Charter blocks ESPN, I'm going to go one of the other 49 options. So right now the government's kind of keeping.
So you're saying if we had more options available to give us internet access, net neutrality wouldn't be an issue, because if somebody blocked Facebook, we would drop that service and go somewhere else.
Completely. That's exactly what I'm thinking. And I think as you see Google and other services coming in on non-coax or non-cable, you're going to see that. And you're already seeing Charter and all these people very scared of that.
So you're saying that in the future there are going to be companies that aren't telecoms that are going to be offering internet service.
I think it's a case, and Google being a great example of that right off the bat.
And they wouldn't need to wire anything. It would all be wireless, or Google would have to wire
Google's having to wire it, so in a lot of cases they're having to run fiber. That's what they're doing in Kansas City with Google Fiber, and Austin, Texas. So they're actually having to build out that infrastructure, but it's just interesting we're at that point.
Telephones, the wire would be laid, and every company would then have access to that wire, right?
That's how telephones work now, is they're a common
carrier. So now, but you've got to have, I've had to have in my new neighborhood, Charter come out and run wires, DirecTV come out and run wires, and so if Google wants to do it, they're going to have to come out and run wires. They're all running the same wires to the house.
In some cases not. So Google's running most of their backbone off pure glass fiber which is a different wire than, say, Charter or Comcast, which to the house at least, they run in coax. Now, on the back end, you're right, a lot of them do use fiber from running from city to
Right,
city.
right,
And
right.
things like that.
But they're all running their own, or they're all using their own,
And in
or
a lot of cases, they're all running their own.
so they're not sharing it the way they used to with the phones.
Well, and they do in some of the major telecom providers do now, but
Right.
some of the new guys, they're all building it out,
Yeah.
which is costly for
So
sure.
you're saying in Europe they have many more options when it comes to internet providers.
In a lot of cases, yeah, and that's why you don't hear about it as much.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, there are some cases that followed the U.S. model here and have some of the same issues.
Well, if you think about it, we have more phone options than we have internet options.
Yeah.
That's true.
And it's just an interesting example of, and people will differ on their opinions on this, but this is an interesting example where if we had additional competition,
Yeah.
I think people wouldn't have to be as afraid.
That's why Larry makes you think. Larry from R&D. Larry Stenneback. Now put your white coat on and get back down into the basement.
You got it, McGraw.
757 KTRS.
We're here with Ron Aimlin, the organizer of the upcoming St. Louis Business Expo, April 12th at the St. Charles Convention Center. It's the largest business-to-business trade show in Missouri.